and gentlemen, and thank you for watching the show. This is your Top Think Tanks review, and I am your host, Bryce Dolan. Now, today on the show, we're going to look at 5 different top 50 United States think tanks and look at the top stories from each one of their websites. To begin the show, Human Rights Watch calls out a possible war crime against Syria and Russia. Airstrikes by the joint Russian-Syrian military operation that killed dozens of civilians, mostly school children, in the northern opposition-controlled Syrian governorate of Idlib on October 26th could constitute a war crime. Witnesses told Human Rights Watch that the attack struck a school complex in a residential area in the middle of the town of Al-Has while children were in class. The complex included a kindergarten, an elementary school, 2 middle schools, and a secondary school. The attacks also hit other nearby civilian infrastructure. On a clear morning, warplanes attacked a large school compound while class was in session and kept on bombing while children and teachers tried to flee, said Bill Van Esveld, senior children's rights researcher at Human Rights Watch. The fresh horror of this attack on school children is a testament to the inadequacy of the international response to ongoing war crimes in Syria. The attacks killed 14 children, including 9 girls, 12 men, and 7 women, all civilians, according to the Violations Documentation Center, a Syrian monitoring group. Now, there's been conflicting reports. The United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, reported that the attack had killed 22 children. One resident told Human Rights Watch that the casualties included 22 children and 7 parents who came to pick up their children after the first of several bombs exploded, and that the death toll could rise among the more than 40 wounded who have been sent to hospitals in Syria and evacuated to Turkey. Now, about 1.7 million Syrian children are out of school in the country due to the conflict, and 1 in 3 schools is closed due to destruction, use for military purposes, or to shelter displaced people. Here is a short video of the horror of just one bomb dropping on the school complex.
هذا سكول هذا مصر.
I'm sorry to say, ladies and gentlemen, you just witnessed a heinous war crime be committed. Now, next, the Council on Foreign Relations has an update from Mosul. US-backed Kurdish-led forces clashed with fighters from the self-proclaimed Islamic State in the suburbs of Raqqa on Monday. It comes a day after the Arab-Kurdish coalition, known as the Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, announced the beginning of an operation backed by US airstrikes to retake the militant group's de facto capital. An SDF spokesman said that their forces captured several villages north of the city on Sunday. The operation coincides with a US-backed operation across the border in Iraq to push the Islamic State out of the city of Mosul. An SDF spokesman called on international parties to provide logistical and political support for the operation and humanitarian aid to civilians in the city. So, as US-backed Kurdish-led forces attack fighters in the suburbs of Raqqa, they're currently getting pushed out of Mosul as well, so it's a slow process, and unfortunately it's a painful process with some lives being lost, but it will be worth it once the Islamic State is officially ousted. Now, next, the Brookings Institution says Americans dislike the Islamic State more than Putin or Assad. Although the US presidential election has hardly been about real policy issues, the conflict in Syria and the fight against the Islamic State have been among the hot policy issues frequently debated by Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Now, though both have highlighted the threat of the Islamic State, they have differed on how to actually deal with it. A new University of Maryland Critical Issues poll sheds new light on where the American public stands on these issues. It turns out that Americans want to put aside differences with Russia and join forces against the Islamic State, according to this poll. This is not to say that Americans trust Russia or like its president Vladimir Putin. In fact, Americans dislike Putin, with Democrats identifying him in an open-ended question as the single most disliked national or world leader, while Republicans identify him as the fourth most disliked, close to Kim Jong-un, but far behind their domestic nemesis, President Obama and Clinton. Now, despite their expressed dislike of Putin, the American public is inclined to put differences with Russia aside to confront the Islamic State, even though Moscow is also working with the United States opponents, namely the regime of Syrian President Bashar Assad, Hezbollah, and Iran. And while Americans continue to express reservations about more extensive U.S. military involvement in Syria, Trump's constituency expresses views far more hawkish than not only those of Clinton, but of also what Trump has expressed. Start with attitudes about the relations with Russia on Syria. Americans across partisan lines are unified on one question: the degree to which they would like to see more Russian-American cooperation. 2/3 of the public say that the current level of cooperation is less than what they would like to see, including 72% of Republicans and 65% of Democrats. After describing the fact that the United States and Russia support opposite sides of the Syrian conflict, while both also want to defeat the Islamic State, respondents were asked about the best path to defeat the Islamic State. Some 60%, including 2/3 of Republicans and a majority of Democrats, preferred to put aside differences with Russia to focus on confronting the Islamic State. So I agree, we need to confront the Islamic State and we can't do it alone. We need help. More specifically, we need Russia's help. And if the US and Russia teamed up to oust the Islamic State, there would be nothing left. However, can you partner up with a country who is constantly committing war crimes and violating human rights in Syria? I understand we need to put aside our differences to possibly work together and oust ISIS, but how can you be partners with someone who is constantly committing war crimes in Syria? Yes, we have an opposition with them. Yes, we're against each other in Syria, but we can do it in a professional manner, so to speak, to where we have proper war, we have proper battle, not dropping bombs on schools while children are in class. So between a rock and a hard place here, the United States and Russia are both between a rock and a hard place. Now next, Trump in particular has iterated that immigrants are pouring into our country, taking jobs and making America unsafe. Well, according to the Pew Research Center, the size of the United States unauthorized immigrant workforce stabilized after the Great Recession. There were 8 million unauthorized immigrants in the United States working or looking for work in 2014, making up 5% of the civilian labor force, according to new Pew Research Center estimates using government data. Now, the number was unchanged and the share was down slightly since 2009, the year the Great Recession officially ended. Now, the recent stability in the trend for unauthorized immigrants in the United States workforce echoes that for the unauthorized immigrant population overall. Both groups had grown rapidly during the 1990s and early 2000s. Compared with their sizes at the start of the recession in 2007, the unauthorized immigrant workforce was slightly smaller in 2014, and the overall unauthorized immigrant population was markedly smaller. Now, most states that experienced change in their unauthorized immigrant workforces also experienced change in their total unauthorized immigrant populations. In 12 states, both total the number of unauthorized immigrants and the number of unauthorized immigrants in the civilian labor force changed in the same direction from 2009 to 2014. In 3 states where the unauthorized immigrant workforce changed from 2009 to 2014, Minnesota, Rhode Island, and Utah, unauthorized immigrant populations overall did not change during that period. In 2014, the nation's civilian labor force consisted of about 133 million US-born workers, 83% of the total amount of workers, 19.5 million lawful immigrant workers, 12%, and 8 million unauthorized immigrant workers, 5%. the numbers of U.S.-born members of the workforce and lawful immigrant members of the workforce increased from 2009 to 2014, while the number of unauthorized immigrant workers did not. So, I don't know if you can necessarily make the claim that they're pouring into our country and taking away our jobs when 83% of the labor force are U.S.-born workers. Then also, look at the flip side of that, 12% of the labor force are authorized immigrants. So only 5% of the total labor force, ladies and gentlemen, is illegal or unauthorized. 5% of the entire labor force. I mean, that's 8 million people, but you're going to tell me 5% are taking away jobs from the other 95%? I don't think that's a valid argument anymore. Now, to end the show, we find ourselves back in Turkey, unfortunately, with Freedom House. In the early morning hours of November 4th, police in Turkey took into custody 11 members of the People's Democratic Party, otherwise known as the HDP, including its co-leaders. Authorities also interfered with Twitter, Facebook, and WhatsApp to slow communication in and from Turkey. The HDP supports greater rights for Turkey's ethnic minorities and increased autonomy for the majority Kurdish southeast of the country. It is closely tied to the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, and its Syrian PKK, and its Syrian affiliate, the Democratic Union Party, the PYD. Several of the MPs arrested last night were previously involved in peace talks between the government and the PKK, talks that collapsed in March 2015. In response to the mass detention of leaders and members of parliament of the People's Democratic Party in Turkey, Freedom House issued the following statement. The decision to arrest the leaders of the People's Democratic Party, the third largest party in parliament, shows that there are no limits to Erdogan's drive to consolidate all power under his presidency, said Robert Herman, Vice President for International Programs. These arbitrary detentions will lead to greater violence in Turkey and threaten the fight against the Islamic State in Syria. Now, if you remember, ladies and gentlemen, last time we commented on Turkey and we had them in our show, I said you can't really call them a democracy anymore. You can't really call him President Erdogan anymore because they are slowly slipping into a dictatorship. And that is actually the title of this Freedom House article. Turkey arrests parliamentarians, accelerates descent into dictatorship. So, unfortunately, in these last couple months, because of a failed military coup, we have seen Turkey slip more and more and more into a dictatorship as people are getting arrested for defending ethnic minorities and are pushing for increased autonomy for the majority Kurdish southeast of the country. So again, we call on Turkey to end this state of emergency, to stop oppressing your civilians, and to again adopt a democracy rather than slip into a dictatorship. So again, ladies and gentlemen, we'll keep an eye on Turkey and have updates for you as much as they come. Same with the offensive in Mosul. We'll keep you up to date as much as we can. But the next episode of the show is going to be your top human rights organizations review, so make sure you check that out. You can find the links to all of these articles directly to the articles on their websites below in the description. While you're doing that, subscribe to our YouTube channel, give us a like on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter. But that does it for your Top Think Tanks review, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching the show. I was your host, Bryce Dolan.